There's something strange about destiny. When we look back at someone's life, we see a story. One decision led to an opportunity. One failure led to an unexpected meeting. One rejection pushed them toward a different path. And years later, somehow the pieces seem to connect. But when you're actually living through those moments, you don't see a story, you see chaos, a job you just lost, an opportunity that disappeared, a plan that fell apart, someone who walked out of your life, a decision you made without knowing whether it was right or wrong. And sometimes the hardest part isn't the failure itself. It's not knowing where that failure is taking you. But what if there were a philosophy that could change the way you see those moments? Not a magic formula, not just think positive, and definitely not the idea that wanting something badly enough will somehow make the universe hand it to you. It's much more practical than that, and much harder to accept. You cannot control everything that happens to you, but you can have enormous influence over the person who comes out the other side. And sometimes that's what changes what we call destiny. To understand why, let's go back to 1985. Steve Jobs was pushed out of Apple, the company he had helped build. But forget, for a moment, the Steve Jobs the world remembers. Forget the iPhone. Forget the keynote stages. Forget the image of one of the most recognizable figures in technology. Look at him at that exact moment, without knowing how the story ends. He was around 30 years old, and the company that had become a huge part of his identity was suddenly no longer his. If the story ended there, we might simply call it failure, but it didn't. And this reveals the first thing we often misunderstand about destiny. We judge events too early. Imagine your life is a book. You're on page 117, something goes wrong, and immediately you decide, this story is going in the wrong direction. But you haven't read page 180. You haven't read page 240. You don't know how important the person you met this year may become. You don't know where the skill you're learning will eventually be useful. You don't know what another closed door may force you to finally notice. That doesn't mean every painful event secretly happens for some beautiful reason. Life isn't that simple. Some losses are simply losses. Some mistakes have real consequences. But the human mind has a powerful tendency. We take one moment and turn it into a prediction about the future. One failure becomes, I'm a failure. One rejection becomes, I'm not good enough. One broken plan becomes, my life is going nowhere. One difficult year becomes, I'm falling behind. Notice what just happened. An event became a story, and that story can begin controlling what you do next. That's our first clue. Not everything that happens to you determines your future, but the meaning you give to what happens can change the way you behave afterward. Imagine two people experiencing the same failure. The first person thinks, this proves I'm not capable, so he pulls back. He tries less, takes fewer chances, avoids situations where he might be rejected again. The second person asks, what am I missing here? So he looks again, adjusts, learns, tries another direction. Neither person can change what already happened, but from the same starting point, they begin creating two very different futures. This is where destiny starts to become less mysterious. Not because you can control the future, you can't, but because the way you respond today changes the possibilities you may encounter tomorrow. And there's another layer to this, one that keeps people stuck for years. We often tell ourselves, if I knew which choice was right, I'd make it. But life rarely gives you certainty before the decision. You want to change careers, but you don't know whether it'll work. You want to start a project, but you don't know whether anyone will care. You want to learn a skill, but you don't know whether it'll still matter 5 years from now. So you stand between two paths, wanting life to show you the ending of both. But it won't. So you wait. You analyze. You think a little longer. You gather more information. Another month passes, then a year, maybe 3. And sometimes what changes the direction of your life isn't making the wrong choice. It's never making one at all. That's the paradox. We're afraid that choosing one path will cost us another future, but refusing to choose is also a choice. Staying another year is a choice. Not sending the application is a choice. Not starting is a choice. Not having the conversation is a choice. Not learning the skill is a choice. Time keeps moving, whether you choose or not. And that leads to a second principle. Don't build your entire life around what you can know for certain. Build some of it around what is worth discovering. Now go back to Steve Jobs. After leaving Apple, he couldn't have known exactly how everything would eventually connect. He founded Next. He became involved with Pixar. Years later, Apple acquired Next. Jobs eventually returned to Apple. Looking backward, the path can seem almost perfectly arranged, but while someone is living through uncertainty, there is no finished map, and that's important. We often study successful people after enough of their story has already unfolded, and imagine they must have known where they were going all along. Often, they didn't. We're looking at a road after it's been drawn, while judging ourselves for standing in front of a blank page. Those are not the same thing, but now we need to go deeper, because there is something quieter than a major life decision that may shape your future even more. It isn't always talent, it isn't always luck, and it definitely isn't motivation. It's what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching. One major decision can change a day, but one small behavior repeated thousands of times can change a person. You read 10 pages today. Nothing happens, 10 more tomorrow. Still nothing dramatic. You practice a skill for 30 minutes. Nobody notices. You save a small amount of money. Nobody applauds. You practice something you're still terrible at. It doesn't look anything like changing your destiny, and that's exactly why people quit. The mind loves visible change. We want proof that our effort is working, but many of the changes that eventually reshape a life are almost invisible at the beginning. Imagine 2 lines. On the first day, they're almost on top of each other. One person moves slightly toward one direction every day. The other moves slightly toward another. After a week, almost no difference. After a month, still not much. But give those directions enough time, and the distance becomes enormous. Then we look at 2 people standing in completely different places and say, luck, talent, timing, destiny. And sometimes those things absolutely matter. Luck is real. Circumstances matter. Opportunity is not distributed equally, but sometimes what we're seeing is also the accumulated result of thousands of choices that were too small to notice when they happened. And this is where the philosophy becomes uncomfortable, because it replaces an easy question. Why is life doing this to me? With a harder one. Within the things I can influence, what am I doing with them? Not everything is in your hands. Where you're born, some of the people you encounter, some opportunities, some losses, timing, luck. There are enormous parts of life you cannot control. But somewhere inside all of that, there is still a smaller territory that belongs to you. What you pay attention to, what you learn, who you spend time with, how you respond to rejection. whether you try again, whether you're willing to change when the evidence says you're wrong, whether you continue living as an old version of yourself, simply because that version feels familiar. That territory may seem small, but day after day, it compounds. And here's perhaps the strangest part. You may never recognize the exact moment your life changes direction. There may be no dramatic music, no cinematic moment, no one standing beside you saying, "This is the day everything changes." It might just be an ordinary Tuesday night when you decide to start learning something, a morning when you send an email you almost didn't send, the first time you say no to something you've tolerated for too long, a failure that forces you to change your approach, a conversation that seems insignificant at the time, a book you happen to open, one small decision whose importance you won't understand until years later. And that's where the idea of connecting the dots becomes interesting. Steve Jobs famously spoke about connecting the dots when looking backward. You can't always connect them looking forward. Often, you only understand their meaning later. But there's another side to that idea. If you want dots to connect, you have to create some. You have to learn, try, meet people, make things, fail, adjust, step into experiences without knowing exactly where they'll lead. If you spend your entire life standing still because you need certainty first, there may be very few dots to connect. So maybe changing your destiny doesn't begin with predicting the future. Maybe it begins with becoming the kind of person who creates more possibilities for a different future. Instead of asking, "How can I guarantee that I'll succeed?" ask, "Who would I need to become to give myself a better chance?" Instead of, "How can I make sure I never fail?" ask, "If I fail, what will I do next?" And instead of, "When is my life finally going to change?" ask, "What am I doing every day that keeps my life looking exactly like yesterday?" Now I want you to try something. Don't think about the next 10 years. Don't think about your entire life. Think about 1 year. If you continue living exactly as you do today, with the same habits, the same use of your time, the same things you keep postponing, the same fears you keep avoiding, where will you be 1 year from now? Don't answer too quickly. Now change the question. What if, starting today, you changed just one thing, one skill you actually learned, one habit you actually kept, one conversation you finally stopped avoiding, one project you finally started, 1 hour each day reclaimed from something that takes your time but gives almost nothing back? After 1 year, would those two versions of you still be standing in the same place? Probably not. And maybe that's one of the most frightening and hopeful things about being alive. Your future is not entirely under your control, but it isn't entirely written either. Maybe destiny isn't some hidden road waiting for you to discover it. Maybe it's closer to a path that takes shape each time you walk. So before this video ends, I want to leave you with one question. Not, what do you want your life to become? That's too easy. The real question is, what do you already know you need to change, but keep postponing because you're afraid of what might happen if you actually change it? Think about that for a few seconds. And if an answer came to mind, write just one thing in the comments, not your entire life story. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. Just one thing. One thing you know you've been putting off. And maybe a year from now, you'll look back at this completely ordinary moment and realize another dot was just created.